I welcome Professor, Mirza Asmer Beg from Aligarh Muslim University. The professor will speak about on his talk, but let me kind of very quickly introduce Professor Beg's doctoral thesis work. He was awarded the best dissertation prize by the American Studies Research Center, Hyderabad, in 1996. Professor Beg is presently in the Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh, Uttar Pradesh. He also has a keen interest in electoral studies and Muslim politics in India. His work has been published in the journals like the Roundtable, the Commonwealth Journal of International Affairs, Economic and Political Weekly, Seminar, Humanities and Social Sciences Review, Studies in Indian Politics, then Indian Journal of Politics, and so on. So he has authored one book and edited 3 volumes, and I'm sure many more will be on pipeline. And then in 1999, he was a visiting scholar in the Fulbright Programme at Southern Illinois University. He's a fellow of the Salzburg Global Seminars, Austria. Professor Beg, sits on the editorial boards of several international journals and has been, referee to quite a few journals. He is the coordinator in UP for academic surveys conducted by the Center for the Study of Developing Society. Now, I welcome Professor Beg. Professor Beg.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, fine. Good afternoon, Professor Gundi Meda, and thank you for having me with you in your very prestigious lecture series. I am, as Professor Gundi Meda said, that I am a student of politics, so I have some interest in electoral politics. We do a lot of work on election surveys, but I'll not bombard you with a lot of survey data because that would be a bit, say, boring for you. If somebody is interested, you can look up the data later on. I'll basically be talking about some trends vis-a-vis Muslim politics in India, and we'll try to understand, how to make sense of that. Friends, to start, I'll give you some context of what we are talking about. Because, since the 2014 election onwards, there are a lot of issues which are very important vis-a-vis Indian minorities and, of course, Muslims, who happen to be the largest minority group in the country. And we saw a lot of issues thrown at them, because they were actually not issues till that time, or maybe some people used to talk about them, but they became big issues, like issues of, say, Muslims, responsible, or a group of Muslims responsible for the spread of COVID-19. This was the kind of, atmosphere which was created. Even the media, took it up at a very high level, whereby they accused Muslims of spreading COVID-19 deliberately, and Muslim hawkers were denied entries into societies, and all kinds of things happened. Even the government in its official news report, whatever you call it, the official press briefings every day, the Ministry of Health would say that this is the number of people who have been infected with coronavirus, and this is the number of people who are from Tablighi Jamaat, a group of Muslims, So that was the kind of atmosphere. And then there are issues of love jihad and all kinds of things, are there, Islamophobia, and there is this scare of laws like CA and RC and all kinds of things. And you have hate speech and all kinds of, things which are there in the public sphere, which you come across every day. The point basically is that this is the kind of, an atmosphere where a lot of Muslims have no option but to feel a bit scared. That a lot of, people in the country, sometimes very ably assisted by the media, these ideas are being spread in the society, and Muslims are being sometimes stigmatized. They are being rather made to feel that they don't belong. and a lot of other things are happening. Although, the courts in many cases, all the cases against Tablighi Jamaat people, the courts exonerated them honorably. And in many other cases, courts have given very nice judgments, and the Indian judicial system obviously holds a very, very good ray of hope, for the Muslim community in general. But that is the context in which we are operating. Now, when we go to the electoral arena, when we talk about elections in India, so what used to happen, since the time of the first general election, we had a kind of secular, issue, or a secular factor, with political parties being paraded a lot in elections. And there were political parties which at different points of time came up, which were self-proclaimed secular parties. And the Congress was the biggest secular party, and it used to get generally the votes of the minorities, of the rather the Dalits, and a significant section of the upper caste Muslims. And they were safely, winning elections till 1967. They had no issues at the central level and even in the states. But slowly and gradually, as we saw a lot of political parties coming in, and after the 1980s, as we saw the rise of the BJP, which was clearly a party coming from the political right. Other political parties which were there prominent in India, they were centrist political parties, and they were all claiming to be secular political parties. And when they were addressing the Muslims, in general, they used to give them the sense that these political parties are the protectors, and what they were protecting Muslim against was the BJP, especially in the Hindi heartland states of UP and Bihar and Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. And that is what was the fear, which they used to create in the minds of electorate, especially belonging to the minorities and mainly Muslims, who constitute a significant section of the population in UP and Bihar and the two main states. So that fear was created, and the Muslims were made to feel that it is safe for them to to vote for these political parties. But with the passage of time, generally, the voters, even in the Muslim community, seem to probably realize, and which is proved by the data which we get, of elections. We conduct electoral, we have electoral data of all the elections and how different communities and groups vote in different elections. So we saw that with the passage of time, slowly the issue of security or the existential threat, which was created in the minds of the Muslims in general, was replaced by other kinds of issues. For Muslims, like the real issues of jobs, of say food, of health, and other real issues, which are there for people, for others, in the country, as far as elections are concerned. So this showed that Muslims in general had gradually come to exercise a wider choice, and they had refused to act as captive voters, or vote banks for one political party or the other. So instead of putting all their eggs in one basket, they appear to have spread their support widely between different political parties which were there in the electoral arena. But as the elections of 2014 came, the political parties started again, to address Muslim voters in the same conventional political language and force them to respond merely to the issue of protection and security. And that because at that time we saw that the BJP had come up as a big force, and there was every possibility that the BJP would upstage the Congress and come to power at the center. So that was a time, when that fear was created even more strongly. But although, in that elections, we saw that the Muslims did not actually, or all Muslim votes did not go to any one political party. But if we look at the voting pattern of Muslims all over the country, we find that they voted for different political parties, depending upon which political party they thought was better for them in that particular state or that particular area from where they came. So although the political parties had started to concentrate only on the issues of protection and security when they were addressing the Muslims, but the response of Muslim voters was not, that exactly, according to what they were thinking as far as the Muslims would respond, to these issues overwhelmingly. But anyway, as I mentioned in the very beginning, that the kind of issues which came up before Muslims, in the first term of the BJP or the NDA, if you were to technically call it, Muslims were presented with a very different kind of a situation. It's not that violence against Muslims was never happening in India. Riots were happening with much greater frequency in India before 1914, and all kinds of if you call them injustices which Muslims perceive as injustices from the side of the state, all kinds of things used to happen. But the normalization of everyday violence and the normalization of state hate speech which happened subsequent to 1914 was something new. And another very important thing which is important in the electoral arena was that the Lok Sabha elections of 2014 actually showed that an election could be won without Muslim support. Means Muslims were dispensable in the electoral arena. And it was openly stated also. For example, at that time, Ashok Singhal, who was a VHP leader, that important VHP leader, he said that it is time that the minority community learn to respect Hindu sentiments. And many other people said the same thing or similar things, around that time. And then when it came to 2019, we saw that this situation became even more, grave, because the number of Muslims, who are elected to the Lok Sabha, that numbers declined significantly, and more importantly, the BJP did not even give tickets to a single Muslim candidate. Although it's not that people are given tickets on the basis of their religious affiliation, but it cannot be an accident that no Muslim was treated by the BJP on the pretext, on the very flimsy pretext that none of them was rather having that kind of a support, and we are giving tickets only to candidates who have the possibility of or high probability of winning elections. And since we did not find any Muslim in that category, so we did not give tickets to them. So that was the argument. But anyway, the Muslims now are finding themselves to be pushed in a corner, and they also found that they do not have any suitors in the electoral arena, because no political party is wanting to touch them, even with a barge pole. And the consequence was that in the 2019 elections, no political party, or all these political parties which were till now proclaiming at least to be secular, were not ready even to utter the word secular, what to talk of the word Muslim, which of course nobody would utter, but they were afraid to utter even the word secular, because probably they thought that the moment they utter this word, they are going to annoy the majority community. So that was the kind of success which BJP had come to acquire by 2019. And of course, that would be much more pronounced in the 2024 elections, that they had been able to shift the political discourse in India from the center to the right. So now all electoral contestation is taking place and is going to take place on the right side of the ideological divide. So every other political party is forced to come there. They are fighting the elections. They are contesting in the electoral arena on the terms set by the BJP. And that is something which is extremely advantageous to the BJP, because BJP is the original party of the Hindu right. So if other political parties like the Congress and others, which are trying to imitate the BJP, they can never be better than the BJP in the electoral arena, because somebody who's imitating me cannot be better than me. I am the original. So when the original is available, why would people who are voting on those considerations for which they are voting for the BJP, why would they try to go and vote for the Congress or any other political party? So therefore, what happens that at least these political parties, despite the fact that they would not have done much for the Muslims, or if you go to the factual situation, but at least they claimed to be sympathetic to the Muslims. These all political parties were saying that we are secular political parties, we are treating everybody equally. Whatever they did was different but actually at the level of pronouncements, at the level of their stated positions in public, they were uh, saying that we are rather even-handed. But when these very political parties, on which Muslims were having rather a sense of satisfaction that at least they would be not against them, if not working for them, if all those political parties start speaking in the same language, then you can understand the concern in the mind of the Muslims, average Muslim voter. And the important factor, which we just now were talking, and a lot of people have written on that, that is the issue of declining representation of Muslims in the Lok Sabha, which has been declining, but sometime, if you look from 1952, there has been some ups and downs, and the highest number of Muslim MPs elected was 49 in the 1980 general elections. So Muslim representation in the Lok Sabha has been erratic. But, what we see today is that the way these political parties who actually used to give tickets to Muslims, in large numbers, even though as I mentioned, the number of Muslims actually who were getting elected was very erratic. It's not very high, except for, 1980, which again was 49, the highest number. But the point is that now these political parties were also very reluctant, or seem to be very reluctant, in fielding Muslim candidates, because of the fear that they think that the moment they give tickets to Muslims, they would be branded as political parties which are trying to appease Muslims. And they also are, in fact, doubtful about the winning potential of these Muslim candidates. The other important factor responsible for the underrepresentation of Muslims is demographic. The uneven geographic distribution across states, of Muslim populations confines the political strength of Muslims or the presence to specific sub-regions. For example, in sub-regions of Uttar Pradesh, there are around 20 districts which have in UP have a population of more than 20% Muslims. And the Muslim vote is supposed to be a major factor in 34 out of 80 Lok Sabha constituencies in UP. But these numbers are now, in the present context, rendered ineffective in the face of majority community mobilization, something which the BJP is actually doing, and where they are actually suggesting that we don't need the votes of the Muslims. The UP chief minister in the last assembly election in UP openly said, it is a fight between 80-20, because 80% when he says he's referring to the majority community's population, and 20 when he says he's referring to the Muslim population, because Muslims are around 19% of the population of UP. So this kind of open statement coming from a major political party that we don't need Muslim votes actually puts Muslims, on the margins and puts them on the defensive, and they and the suggestion is that they are dispensable. So we don't need to votes, and therefore we don't need to do anything for them. And in fact, the way politics operates in states of UP, for example, which is the most important state electorally in terms of the number of people which UP sent, 80 people which UP sent to the Lok Sabha, which is actually a very significant number. So what is actually happening is that the political party which is in power in UP would do things against the Muslims very openly, and that would be construed as something which is proper, which is right, because we are actually going on and teaching a lesson to the Muslims. And that is something, which they think is eventually going to mobilize, votes of the majority community. And that is considered to be a very important, rather electoral ploy. And the way, they have created that discourse, which I mentioned earlier, which forces other major political parties in UP, like the Samajwadi Party and the Bahujan Samaj Party, to not even utter the word secular because of fear of being branded as pro-Muslim. And the other important factor which leads to the declining number of Muslims in elections, in Lok Sabha and sometimes also in as legislative assemblies is that even when one political party would give a ticket to a Muslim candidate in any constituency, most of the times one would find that the other so-called secular parties will also field a Muslim in the same constituency. And therefore, what happens because of the split in the votes, assuming that all Muslims would, it is just an assumption which later on we'll talk about, that all Muslims will go and vote for a Muslim candidate. They cannot do so because there are 3 or 4 Muslim candidates and 2 or 3 of them from major political parties or prominent political parties. And that leads to the advantage, or that works to the advantage of the BJP, which is actually trying to do majority community mobilization, as of course is the way it operates. Another important reason, why Muslim representation is declining in the Lok Sabha is due to the reservation of constituencies for candidates from the scheduled castes. Now, what is happening actually, that is a very noble idea that seats are reserved for the scheduled caste, but what actually happens, which has been highlighted also by the Sachar Committee report, which actually identified a number of constituencies which were reserved for SCs, despite having a high proportion of Muslims and a low proportion of SCs. Although these anomalies were pointed out by the Sachar Committee and at various other levels also, but no action was taken, And most of these constituencies, but for a few, continued to remain reserved after the 4th delimitation of constituencies in India. So only a few constituencies, rather only 3 constituencies from the stated category, were declared as reserved, were declared as unreserved but the others remained, declared as reserved constituencies. The other important factor is that, which is very important for us to appreciate, that Muslims, when you talk of Muslims and Muslim votes and Muslims voting in elections, the common understanding which forms in the mind of an average Indian is that the Muslim community is a homogeneous group. And all Muslims vote for the same candidate or political party, where they decide. But the fact of the matter is that there are several underlying fault lines in the Muslim community, like in any other community, and they are very clearly reflected in the electoral arena. The relative empowerment of Dalit and OBC Muslims has led to a more marked dichotomy between the socially forward Muslims and the socially backward Muslims. The latter accuse the former of focusing on symbolic and religious issues in order to downplay the socio-economic inequalities persisting within the Muslim community. Moreover, different occupational groups of Muslims, have local rivalries, and these are very noticeable in their voting patterns. So, for example, if a candidate comes from the occupational group of barbers, among Muslims, he is likely to get most of the votes of the barber community, within Muslims. And the others probably would not be that interested in that candidate. Maybe they would be interested in some other candidate who belongs to their occupational category. So this is how, the votes among the Muslims, in any constituency would get rather distributed among different political parties, as would votes of any other social category in the society. If you look at the survey data, of any elections, 2019, 14, on any election, you would find that the way votes in any, for example, among Hindus, among caste groups of Hindus, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, OBCs and categories of OBCs and the Dalits, how the votes get split and distributed among different political parties. The same is true of Muslims. So it is a big myth, if when people talk about Muslims vote, Muslims voting for this party, or Muslims go and vote for that political party. But this is something, which is very advantageous for 2 groups, this kind of a myth. One, it is very advantageous for self-proclaimed leaders of the Muslim community. There are several prominent Muslims, in India who claim to be leaders of Muslims, and the impression goes that whatever they decide, Muslims will follow suit. Now, these political leaders are in a very advantageous position because they are taken as holding a lot of influence in the electoral arena because they are leaders of the Muslim community. So they also project themselves like they represent the Muslim community and the community is with them. On the other hand, these leaders are work to a great advantage of the major party of the Hindu right, that is the BJP, because that helps them to consolidate the votes of the majority community by showing to the majority community that, look here, all Muslims are voting for the same candidate. So what will happen? Their candidates are going to win. So if you want to neutralize that, you come together. So the majority community is so overwhelming in numbers that even if half of the majority community comes to pay heed to this kind of an argument, it is very good for the BJP, because even if half of the people of the majority community vote for a certain candidate, together, that candidate is going to win in that election. So that is how, it is advantageous for both. So although, apparently these self-proclaimed leaders of the Muslim community appear to be speaking every day against the BJP and criticizing the BJP and its leaders, and the BJP and its leaders keep on criticizing them and saying that these are people, who should leave India and probably go to some other country. But actually, they are in some ways helping to the, rather giving strength to each other. So the BJP becomes stronger as these people become more strident in their criticism of the BJP and their mobilization of Muslims, and vice versa. Finally, I would like to make an important point here, and that is that the number of Muslims, I think that this is again a very rather deceptive kind of discourse in which we enter, which we were just talking about, the declining number of Muslims who win elections. And a lot of people have written that these numbers should increase, political parties should give more tickets to Muslims, and so on. There is a huge argument going in that side. But to my mind, the way political parties are organized in India at the moment, the number of Muslims increasing or decreasing does not have much effect. Why? Because the assumption is that if Muslims in significant numbers will be there in political parties and they would be winning elections, when they go to the representative bodies like state assemblies or the Parliament of India, they would bring up issues, which are of concern to Muslims. But as we know, the nature of political parties in India, no candidate who belongs to a significant political party which has a presence in the Lok Sabha or in state assemblies can rake up an issue or bring an issue in the house on her own. So even if there is an issue which is concerning Muslims, which is very important, you will not be able to bring up that issue. An independent Muslim candidate might bring up that issue. A person belonging to a marginal political party which has 2-3 Muslims can bring up that issue, but that issue, unless the party decides to bring it up. Rather, political situation in India, as we have discussed, would not be willing usually to bring up that issue. And that is the reason we see that even when you have significant numbers of Muslims sitting in any elected house, issues concerning Muslims cannot be brought up here. Few years back, there was a major riot in UP, in Muzaffarnagar, where a lot of people got killed. And at that time, the Samajwadi Party was having a significant number of Muslims, around 55 Muslims were there in the Samajwadi Party, and that was in power. But no member of the Samajwadi Party had the courage, in the house to raise up that issue, because the party did not allow them to raise that issue. The leader of the Samajwadi Party, who claimed to be getting significant number of Muslim votes, did not speak on that issue clearly, because of fear of being dubbed as pro-Muslim. So this discourse that if numbers of Muslims or Christians or other minorities increase in the legislative bodies, their voice would be increasingly heard, is actually a very tricky argument. The other argument which is given is relating to political party formation. A lot of people argue that since Muslims are in large numbers in India, they are around 14% plus of the Indian population, and in certain states their numbers are quite significant, like in Assam, like in West Bengal, like in UP, so they should have their own political party. The temptation in electoral democracy is immediately to talk about political parties. You'll have a political party which will speak for you. And the best thing for them, for the argument is that that would be able to, be a very strong voice, of the Muslims. But this leads us to another basic question. It's a technical question that do minority groups gain more by acting only as balancers in the electoral arena or by being direct participants in the contest? Balancers means that by supporting one political party in significant numbers, they create some kind of balance. You support some political party and there is some kind of an agenda on which you agree. And if that political party does not do things which you are very comfortable with, next time you can go and vote for some other political party. So that is kind of a balancing role which minorities in a lot of countries do perform in the electoral arena. But the argument here is to be a direct participant. Now, what happens, that in a first past the post system, as we have in India, where we have usually got multiple players in that game, the best option for minority groups is to only act as balancers and support one of the major players. You agree on certain agenda and then you support that player, assuming, that a lot of Muslims will come around that agenda, that issue, and support. That is something, which is a lot of ifs and buts. But we are only talking at the technical level. Because by doing this, the Muslims would be able, or any minority group which is in significant numbers, will be able to gain the maximum. But if they themselves become a player, this could lead to unifying the majority community against them, thereby neutralizing any advantage which they may hope to gain by making the political party. So making the political party will become a self-defeating exercise, that you make a political party to give a voice to the minority, but that creates a fear in the minds of the majority, and they mobilize even more than they were mobilizing before you formed a former political party, and that goes against your advantage. So the advantage which the minorities' votes have as an add-on would be lost when these votes are given to a candidate who has no chance of winning. So this might work in places where minorities are concentrated in pockets, and political parties which cater to them exclusively have some chance of winning, and that too at the local level, maybe in the assembly elections or some local municipal elections, like we have seen some success stories of the IUDF in Assam and the Muslim League in Kerala. But that is something, which is very local, depending on the way population of Muslims or any minority group is concentrated in certain areas. Then in the electoral arena, you have certain chance of your political party winning the election only on the basis of your votes, or maybe small add-ons. But once your number is around 20% or something, or even less in most of the constituencies, and you want to create a political party, float a political party, that is a self-defeating exercise to the best of my understanding. So now the question in 2014 comes up that what should Muslims do, whom to support, and how to rather be a participant in the electoral arena in the coming elections. On the one hand is the BJP, which although has not given tickets to any Muslims, and its leaders have openly spoken against Muslims and the kind of policies which are there, which we all know, but still the BJP has been constantly trying to enlist the support of the Muslim community. At least this is what the official pronouncements of their leaders are. In the recent municipal elections in some places, especially in the state of UP, a lot of tickets were given to Muslim candidates, and a significant number of them also turned out to be victorious in the elections. But BJP has been doing something rather very serious on the ground. It has enlisted the support of around 25,000 Muslim community leaders, people who are supposed to be, say, intellectuals, or say doctors, engineers, bankers, and other kinds of people. And these intellectuals also argue that the BJP is giving special attention to Pasmanda Muslims and the Sufi Muslims. Now, the BJP's focus is on these two groups because they know that majority of Muslims in India are poor and they belong to the Pasmanda category. Pasmanda is an omnibus term for Muslims who are backward. So all Muslims who are backward in the sense that they are socially backward, many of them belong to occupational communities who converted at some point of time to Islam, but they continue to carry on their traditional trade, like barbers, like cobblers, like butchers, and many others, And then Sufi Muslims, because a lot of Muslims in India practice the Sufi version of Islam, which is rather a version of Islam which the BJP considers to be more moderate, and therefore they are very favorably inclined towards people who follow that kind of Islam, and therefore a lot of leaders, of Sufi Muslims, of say other subgroups within Muslims, Shia Muslims, some other sects among Muslims, they have been enlisted, and of course Pasmanda Muslims in a big number, because majority of Muslims in India would come in the category of Pasmanda Muslims. And these people argue that Muslims are beneficiaries of BJP's social welfare schemes, and there have been no major communal riots since 2014. So Muslims have been given more security under the BJP. If you look at these two claims critically, we find that the first claim of Muslims being beneficiaries of these schemes, is holds a lot of water, because most of these schemes have been rather launched in the society. Of course, many of them have not been able to meet their targets, but they have been non-discriminatory, and therefore a lot of Muslims or people belonging to the Muslim community have benefited from these schemes of where you get gas connections, you get housing, you get other kinds of social welfare things. That is something which has actually benefited the Muslims, and the number of the percentage of votes which the BJP got in the 2019 elections. Many people argued that that was based from the Muslim community. Many people argued that that was mainly because Muslims were rather direct beneficiaries of these welfare schemes, and one can take that as one of the strong reasons because of which a lot of them would have voted. But there are other kinds of local factors also. You live in a particular place, and there are certain social equations, certain relationships, and because of that, people tend to vote for one political party or the other. But the other claim is very tricky, that there has been no major communal violence since 2014. This is per se true, but there have been a lot of other small incidents of violence, and even some major incidents of violence like the Delhi riots and many other places. There have been communal conflagrations, and we have seen a lot of rather damage caused to properties of Muslims in a lot of rather such incidents. So that is something, that claim can be taken with a pinch of salt. But the first one could take as partially, true. And because, in the electoral arena, there are a lot of half-truths and a lot of myths, which are paraded to get your support. So to get support from a certain community. So that is, these are the claims which are made by the BJP. But the problem with the Muslims in general is that other political parties are no better. Because as we see that the discourse has shifted to the right of the ideological divide, so political parties, when they are having a discourse in the electoral arena, they are discussing about issues, Muslims are absent from that discourse. As I mentioned to you, that even the word secular is not mentioned, so how can somebody talk of Muslims? So, and whenever a leader or so-called leader of the Muslim community comes up and starts talking about Muslim issues, they would generally be talking about emotive issues concerning Muslims. Now, that is a double-edged sword. You claim to be talking about Muslims. You claim to be someone, who is very much concerned about Muslims, but you are again raising up emotive issues. Now, what happens that the BJP, on the other hand, is also raising up emotive issues concerning the majority community. So what happens that you tend to be consolidating the electoral contestation in the emotive political arena. Now, in elections, in any mature democracy, issues in the electoral arena need to be real issues, like food, like housing, like electricity, like roads, like medicine, and things like that. But political parties would never want that the electoral contestation should actually be on these issues. So for political parties, emotive issues are very nice because they are issues on which you just have to talk. You have to give a nice speech. You have to emotionally, charge the atmosphere and emotionally address the people, and you get their votes. So the majoritarian politics, in the country is basically emotive, where you are talking about emotional issues, about your identity, about your victimhood, how history has been unkind to you. So we are trying to upturn that. We are trying to provide a balm on your wounds. And these wounds are not real wounds. These wounds are emotional wounds. So we are giving an emotional balm for that emotional wound, which actually we have created in your emotions. So it's a very tricky, vicious cycle where emotional wounds are created, and then political parties would come and provide solace to you emotionally. So there they don't need to do anything. And when some leader of the minority community comes up and again raises up emotive issues concerning minorities, that your emotive issues are not being taken care of, you are being rather marginalized, but they are also not focusing on the real issues. So to my mind, what is important for ordinary Muslim voters or voters of any community for that matter, that they need to respond to real issues alone in the electoral arena. And anybody talking about emotive issues, especially the minorities, should be very cautious not to respond to that, because they are playing into that trap, because that is what the uh, the people on the other side would want. So therefore, it is self-serving for both these groups, but not good for the people. And for a fact, in the long run, not good for the country. So what we need to do is to ensure that in the electoral arena, the real issues are foregrounded, and we respond to real issues alone. Otherwise, our response should be muted. We don't need to be so demonstrative about our response here in the electoral arena. We need to just think over and see that which are the political parties and leaders which are talking about the real issues which affect you in your everyday life. Because that is how, you can give a message to the political parties and leaders who till now have probably given that impression that they are your real benefactors, that till now, they have not been able to do anything substantive. And if anybody, even these political players, if they want to do anything substantive vis-a-vis Muslims, they need to talk about the real existential issues of bread and butter, of food and housing, and other real issues in the electoral arena. So that is basic. Of course, it is not going to be easy, but it is something, which people need to understand, need to realize, because that is something which is going to be in the long-term interest. So that is, to my mind, of course, something, which people need to look up to in the coming elections. Of course, when the elections start and the canvassing starts and political parties create that kind of an atmosphere, and the emotive issues are presented in such an attractive manner, as Ernesto Laclau says, that they are like empty signifiers. They are so attractive, like a beautiful balloon, so that from a distance it looks that they are the real issues, but they are actually very artificial, because like a balloon has only air inside and there's nothing significant inside. So these are the empty signifiers. So we as citizens need to understand what are the empty signifiers and what are the real signifiers, what are the real issues. And real issues are universal, they affect everyday lives of people, and that is what we need to look at. So to my mind, this is how we can make some sense. Of course, it is not so easy to suggest, what people ought to do. And of course, whatever you say, people are so diverse. There's no homogeneity among any section of population, more so Muslims. So it's not that whatever I and you prescribe, people are going to listen to that. But at least we can make some sense, of how the situation is and how it is going to unfold, in the times to come. I'll stop here to take your questions, because I'm sure you'll be having a lot of queries about what I spoke. So I'll stop here to take your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Professor Mirza Beg. Very insightful talk indeed. Basically, you're referring to this normalization of violence in an everyday basis. I think that's kind of a very, very powerful argument. And also, how Muslims as a community actually kind of became indispensable. The whole idea of citizenship became so shallow, hollow. Whether it's kind of doubtful whether actually they're citizens or somebody else actually, being living in this country as such. Also, kind of the reflections on this, the political politics, deployed by the strategies deployed by BJP and then other political parties also. Example like where you mentioned about this, carving out or making a reserved constituency where Muslim population kind of large in number, and also the reaching out to this Pasmanda Muslims, where some sort of divisions, trying to kind of highlight the divisions, and then preferring over one section of the community over the other, I think this is something that, they also, playing the same strategy actually with the Dalits, particularly in, UP, where, because, Chamas are large in number, and then Chamas actually support, Mayawati is in a BSP. And so other Dalits actually kind of, per se, Balmikis and other communities are kind of being roped into this, and then given some space and all that. That's how they are actually kind of, playing, Also, the other point is a very valuable point is that, the political parties actually, not just the, one BJP is not giving this one thing, but then other political parties actually afraid to give the, seats. Now, that's very, very kind of, clearly we can see that, for instance, like, last time in Andhra Pradesh, we have, a large chunk of, Muslim population in Andhra Pradesh, either in, Telangana or in, Andhra Pradesh. And then, but the Telugu party, which is kind of, built upon this, Muslim support and all that, they denied, giving even a single seat to the Muslims, in the previous, Telugu party regime and all that. I don't know what they're going to do now, but at least earlier they didn't. I think they paid the price and all that. I think these are very, very valuable issues. Also, the point that bringing this emotional issues, issues around this idea, identities or something, or other relating issues, but then sidelining the real issues. I think that's what they are kind of playing. They are very good at playing those with emotional issues and all that. Thank you very much for this brilliant talk. I request my colleagues and then the students to kind of make their comments, and then questions would be very much welcome. Thank you so much. Yeah, Vishesh, please.
Hello, hi Professor. Thank you for the talk. I hope I'm audible clearly. Yeah. So I wanted to ask, you mentioned about how clerics BJP, and I have read how like Vajpayee and Rajnath Singh both started off with garnering a lot of support with the Shia community, and I wanted to know a little bit more about how they're influencing the clerics and on the actual voting of the people.
Okay. You see, this is a very old strategy of political parties. What the Congress used to do earlier, that if you remember and you might have read about it, that Indira Gandhi used to visit the Shahi Imam in Delhi. Now, Shahi Imam, what is a Shahi Imam? It's like a priest of a temple. So he's an Imam of a mosque. He's a person who just leads the prayers in a certain mosque. But the political party at the center wanted to elevate him to a certain level as if he is like some Imam of a king, of the Nizam's, priest. And then they gave him so much of importance, and she created him virtually as a leader of the Muslim community. So in elections, after election, Shah Imam would probably is virtually issue like some kind of a whip to the Muslim community, although nobody listened. But that was the impression, which was created. So what happens, you create certain elites, you co-opt certain people, and they are used as symbols of the community. So these people are benefited, maybe on their recommendation, I became a Raj Sabha member or something else, or somebody gets something, but they are just a limited number of people who are the beneficiaries. And by dealing with these people, it is easier for political parties. So they have a relationship of reciprocity, but they are giving that impression that the community is with you. Are you getting my point? The same thing what the BJP did, that they co-opted some people and gave them certain positions. For example, a former vice chancellor of our university was made a member of the legislative council. But the impression is that he is a leader in the Muslim community and he happens to be a Pasmanda also. So he is, by giving him that position, which he does not need because he has lots of money and everything, and he occupied a much higher position than what he gets now. But you give an impression that you are giving representation to Pasmanda Muslims. You are not giving representation to ordinary ones, as Professor Sam just now mentioned, about Dalits or about others. You take some people elites among them and give them certain positions. And the impression is that the community is benefiting. Similarly, as you mentioned about Rajnath Singh, he in Lucknow cultivated certain Shia leaders, So these people were the beneficiaries. It's not that ordinary Shias are going to get any benefits out of that. But the impression will be created that these prominent people from the community are in the party. So that means, that the community would, be benefiting and they are supporting this political party. So it's just like an impression is created, by co-opting these leaders by political parties.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Vishnu?
Yes.
Professor Mirza Beg, thank you very much for your presentation. I have two questions. One first technical question is that how do you calculate about the electoral behavior of the Muslims? Is it only through the sample survey, or do you have any other techniques that you adapt to make sense of that? That's the question number one. The second, I'm not very sure about making a distinction between the so-called welfare, bread and butter issues and the issues about violence or dignity and humiliation. Because most of the time, if you are terribly insecure, if you're not very sure about your environment, I'm talking purely from the point of view of wage workers, even people who are in the labor market. If you're not very sure about your safety, it actually affects the way people work. So I'm not sure. I think this is a distinction, I think, which I think we have to. I find it very difficult to make that distinction, because I get your point when you say that people are talking about emotive issues, and security is not an emotive issue, it's a life and death issues. My humiliation is not an emotive issue, it's the way I am. My indignities is a very important part of the game. And so therefore, to make that distinction, I'm not sure if it will work, because they're deeply interconnected. I wanted to hear what you have to say about that. And finally, every community, when you think in an aggregated way, and then you look at the growth of the professional, as you know, the post-partition, a lot of professional Muslims left for Pakistan. And a large majority of the laboring population or the peasants and so on remain. And of course, there is a small percentage of the elites as well. But now, in the last 70 odd years, you will find the reality is not the same. As you were mentioning, there are professionals, there are doctors, there are chartered accountants, there are professors, and so on and so forth. Do you think it's worthwhile to really look at this rising professional classes and look at the way they shape the opinion or of the community as a whole by their behavior, their political affiliations and so on? This is a kind of speculative question, because arising out of what you mentioned about individuals. But if you look at it sociologically, you may have a different explanation as to how the community professionals are looking at the political reality maybe slightly differently than ordinary Muslims. I don't know if I've stopped there, but I enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you, Professor Vishnu, for some very important, insightful questions. About your first question about calculating the electoral behavior, of course, we have only one useful instrument, and that is the post-poll surveys which we conduct in the CSDS. And on the basis of that post-poll survey, we get the data about what is the percentage of Muslims or Dalits or OBCs or upper caste Hindus and Thakurs and Brahmins and all of them, And to my mind, they are fairly reliable, because we follow these scientific methodologies. So the numbers are fairly rather correctly calculated. Well, at least, because in social sciences, as you understand, you need to have a broad idea. So exactly, if it is 1 or 2 percentage points here and there, that doesn't make much difference, that only adds up to our understanding. That distinction which I was trying to make about real and pseudo issues, which you talked about, that they are very interconnected, you are very right. But what I was trying to say, and to further add to what I said, was that the problem is that when these, real issues are so closely intertwined with emotionalism, because they are not an issue actually. For example, I'll give you an example to make it clearer. For example, security. Security is a very important existential issue. But for example, all of us in this class, we don't have any security issue. But somebody comes up and creates an artificial insecurity amongst us. So that real issue, which is a non-issue here, is articulated very nicely in an emotional language. And we all start feeling insecure. I'll give you another example. Sorry. For example, this whole politics of victimhood with the majority community. Now, any person who is some kind of rationality would understand the 80% of the majority community in India can never have a threat with 14% people. But political leaders will come and convince people repeatedly that you have an existential threat also. And all statistics tells people that the majority community, although it is 83%, but in economy it is 98%, in civil services it is 99%, everywhere it is between 98 to 100%. But still we are successful in creating that fear of victimhood, in the minds of the majority community. At least 38% people are convinced and they come and vote for us. So that is what I was talking about, that even if there is no such problem, we use this emotional, rather, instrument to create that kind of an issue. And that creates a problem. And of course, that blurring of lines, they do it deliberately. So that in this talk, we were talking about this issue, that issue, but you are very right. They are very closely intertwined. But very clearly, they would ensure that all real issues are camouflaged and all emotive issues are foregrounded. And we all think and assume that these are the real issues which confront us. So that is the cleverness of political parties. And since we are so insecure, we get taken in because everybody is fearful, that resources are less. We are in a developing country. I got a job, whether my daughter will get a job or not, and my son will get an admission in the medical college or not. So all insecurities are there. And they know very well, they are clever people. They play on our insecurities and very nicely, present such a platter before us that it is so tempting, that we immediately fall for it. And you talked about a very important point, and that was very, very, but we also think about it quite often, that when I talked about political parties co-opting some professionals, high-performing professionals, and they are their show boys, to show to the community that, okay, all these good people and well-read people in your community are with us. So that means that if they have made that choice, you should make that choice because, of course, you are less educated and less knowledgeable than them. That is very important because these very people, these very professional people who are so very successful in their lives, when it comes to political parties co-opting them, either it be the BJP or the Congress or the political parties, these guys would go, immediately towards them and take their piece of the cake, that undeserved piece of cake. But when it comes to giving a direction to the majority, to the community, they will never come forward, usually. Of course, I don't blame everyone, but people like us, who are educated, maybe they are educators, they're engineers, they're doctors, but when it comes to coming forward without any attraction, from any political party, but on their own, telling people in their community what to do, organizing them in some civil society movement, some other NGO, some other socially productive work, and giving them some kind of political direction also. So usually people are not very forthcoming. So that is something, which these educated people, need to think about, that they have certain social responsibilities also, and they need to rather come up to that. So that is a very valid.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Beg.
Thank you, Vishnu.
Okay, Professor Beg, my colleague, Professor Rakshi Rath, has a follow-up question actually with that, Professor Vishnu's, point of emotional, real issues and all that, what she says that in the social psychological literature, there is something about symbolic threat and realistic threat. Yeah, Professor Rakshi, would you like to kind of say on that, elaborate on that, please?
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm so sorry. Thank you for the talk, Professor Beg. It was illuminating in the way that you're questioning the categories that have been set out, and particularly the point about how the other political parties are now towing the terms and conditions actually set up by the BJP. I think that's an important sort of heist of imagination is how I would put it, that the BJP has pulled off, where that discourse has shifted. Having said that, some of the things that I think would be nice to have some elaboration on is this idea of the distinction between a real and a real issue and the emotive issues. Some work that I've done in my some work that I've done looks at how leadership, especially political rhetoric, actually whips up issues that are then brought to the forefront to be made emotional about. So even something as food will not be a real issue unless it is made to be a real issue, right? Even questions of development, and the BJP has understood this perfectly well. So almost every issue, almost this building of what even India needs to be like, and the idea that sabka saath, sabka vikas, for example. Now the we always assumed was for Indians, but if you look at the political rhetoric and look carefully at the speeches, it always aims towards a Hindu India, right? All of their signifiers in their speeches is towards a Hindu India, except now we've come to a stage where the Hinduization of it is so complete that now they can use it interchangeably. They say India, but almost the majority of the population understands it to mean the Hindu population. Now, given that, I think understanding it as a political strategization of hate mobilization possibly helps more. Sorry?
Yes.
Hello? A political strategization of hate mobilization requires that there is a constant sense of threat. And it has been repeatedly seen in social psychological literature, at least and experimentally strange, that realistic threat actually doesn't invoke as much anger as symbolic threat does. And so even the statistics that you spoke of, you mentioned, absolutely. When you look at the statistics in and of themselves, it is ridiculous to think that 83% can feel victimized by 14%. And yet, way back in 2005, at least that's when I started looking at the VHP posters. They have these visual posters. They have lots of hand-drawn posters that they set up in these big melas, right? The Kumbh Mela, the Magh Mela. This is where they set it up. Now, they had huge posters with statistics, and it was aimed towards explaining how Muslim populations are now overtaking the country. So they are also making use of it. The point is, it's not about if it is true or false. They are mobilizing on those grounds, even on grounds of statistics, even on grounds of numbers. So I guess, just to build on what Professor Bishnu is asking around those categories, I think what I'd like to hear a bit more about is perhaps not the hardening of this idea of the distinction between real and emotive, but how are issues made to become real? How are symbolic issues made to become real enough that they evoke this sort of response? I hope that makes sense for that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I understand, because, what has been done, what is being done now is that, all channels through which information reaches the voter have been completely monopolized almost. So it's we who create issues. And there's a lot of falsehood into what information or statistics are given to people, that, and a lot of, you might have read about the fact-checking website, people who were arrested because the powers that be did not like those people exposing the facts, they invented facts. But there are a lot of, there was a book also which I read recently about the trawl, that there are more than 7,000 WhatsApp groups, even only in the state of UP where I work. And these WhatsApp group 24 hours are sending information to people of all kinds, and they're all concocted stories, about this population, about the number of wives with Muslims are having, whatever be the reality. The Family Health Survey would say that the number of people who are having 2 wives is more amongst Hindus than among Muslims, but that is a fact to be buried somewhere else. Normally, people will believe that all Muslims have 4 wives, they have 15 children, and all kinds of things, which they rather spread through these WhatsApp groups, and then they love jihad and all kinds of statistics are created. So that actually, of course, has a certain reaction in the minds of people. And then, of course, as you mentioned, that there is this very symbiotic relationship between both these arenas of real politics and pseudo issues, which earlier used to be very clearly compartmentalized, but there is a lot of interactivity between both these categories in the present times. I was surprised to see, in our surveys in the last assembly elections in UP in 2022, when we found that a lot of people in the villages, what they were saying was that we are going to vote for this political party because Mr. Modi has rather increased India's prestige internationally. So if you were to ask that person what is international, what is out of India, he doesn't know anything. He doesn't know maybe the city from where to which his village connects. But that is what he has been told. If you ask them further, that what does it mean that India's image has increased, and how India's image has gone up and what India has been doing, they are not concerned with that. They don't know anything, but they are very proud actually that our image has gone up. And you might have read about that, that a very prominent TV channel, when this Ukraine-Russia war had started, actually announced in its news that tomorrow the war will stop for 4 hours or 8 hours because the Prime Minister has intervened there, and he has asked the war to stop for 8 hours so that Indian students can evacuate from there. So next day, the Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson of the Government of India was very embarrassed, and he held a press conference and said that if we say this and we agree to this argument, then that means that the war tomorrow next day will start because our Prime Minister has asked the war to start. So we are here stopping the war, and next day we are starting it. So that gives a very bad impression about India. So this is something, which we can't digest. So the media is going overboard in rather explaining these things, or rather creating these kinds of myths in the society, and they work, of course, because people are feeling proud, and of course they respond by giving you votes. So that is there. I agree to what you said.
Thank you. Thank you, Rakshi, for the excellent question, and then Professor. Jyothna, just kind of one question before I'll give the chance. Professor, there's one, Manav, he wanted to ask, if not the BJP, which alternate parties can the Muslim vote give a vote to, given the drastic pull of the Congress, which is historically has a huge vote share of Muslims? What's your opinion as to how the 2024 election will have an important vote on the Muslim voting trajectory in the coming future? This is in the in the chat box, actually.
Of course, I don't know how Muslims, because what goes in the minds of 20 crore people, I don't know. But what I am sure about, that Muslims in general are in a state of great confusion. Why? Because they don't know whom to vote, mainly because they have no suitors. Nobody is asking for their votes, because the moment any political party even asks for their votes, they are being dubbed as anti-majority. So you are standing in a queue going to vote for an election where people want your vote, but they don't want to ask you for your vote. So in general, people are conscious of the worthlessness of their vote, that whichever political party we vote, our vote is going to go waste unless we vote for the BJP. Because other political parties apparently don't stand a chance against the BJP. And even if the other political parties, hypothetically speaking, are able to somehow cobble up some kind of a majority and win the election, we don't have any hope because, as we mentioned, we were discussing earlier, that the political discourse has so shifted to the right that other political parties are virtually speaking the same language. So it is 2-3 different spokespersons speaking, but they are speaking the same thing. Maybe one is using a slightly moderate language. The other one is using a more strident kind of aggressively nationalistic majoritarian language. And the third one is using something in between. So there are 3 versions of the same thing, actually. So they are clones of the BJP in practice in the electoral arena. And that is a very big problem for almost anybody, who is not totally decided that either he is here or there. For all voters, I think it is the same problem, but more so for the Muslims or other minorities, say Christians and others, who are very helpless, because otherwise also, at least hypothetically, you, as a voter in the elections, as a citizen of the country, you thought that there was something in your hands, although practically it was not, but at least you thought that there is something in your hands when you go to vote, you can change things or things can change. But the kind of situation we are in, where it is, the atmosphere has been so structured that everybody is convinced about what is going to happen in May. So in that situation, people who are on the margins, like say the Dalits, the Muslims, even women, especially women living in rural areas and slightly rather relatively underprivileged as compared to the privileged women elsewhere, they have everything to fear. So that is what the situation is.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Deotna, please.
Thank you, Professor Beg, for the excellent presentation. I just wanted to know a bit more about the Pasmanda Muslim situation and BJP aligning with them in a very kind of in a very certain way, because when we see that there is a lot of lot of attention that's been given to the Pasmanda Muslims by BJP. There's talk about the job reservation, etc. But at the same time, there is a fear of regionalization of kind of or the regional support that the regional parties would garner from the Pasmanda Muslims, because we see that the the 4% Muslim quota among the OBCs were like completely scrapped before the Karnataka election. So if you could just tell me a little bit about this regional versus national kind of landscape and the way both RSS, BJP they're aligning with the Pasmanda situation.
There are 2-3 things which come out of your question. One, the Pasmanda Muslim is not, again, a homogeneous category. Actually, there is no category like Pasmanda Muslims that way, but it's a very broad omnibus term to put all socially backward Muslims into that category, because technically in Islam, there is no caste system, but still, since India has such a well-entrenched caste system, so Muslims also have started identifying themselves through that prism of caste anyway. So to my mind, it's not that BJP actually wants to bring them together, but since the Pasmandas are in such large numbers, so when you start talking about them, that we want to do something for Pasmandas, and mind you, BJP has not announced anything specific for Pasmandas till now, which is materially important, except some statements coming from political leaders and certain elites within Pasmandas getting certain nominations in certain places. But that creates a very attractive kind of political noise. And to my mind, these overtures towards the Pasmanda Muslims, even if it is materially insignificant, but otherwise, in the political atmosphere of the country, it creates a very nice, impression about the BJP, that BJP is concerned about the downtrodden and the backward. See the noises which are being made for the Dalits, for the Ati Pichla OBCs, means the most backward OBCs among the Hindu community. And then here, talking about Pasmanda Muslims aligns with your slogan, when you are talking about Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas. And the other important thing is that it also cuts against the general argument which is advanced against the BJP, that BJP is a Hindu nationalist, majoritarian political party. They are saying that we are not like that. Although we will not use the word secular, but we are talking about everyone. Sabka saath. So this is addressed not to Muslims basically, but it is addressed to the moderate Hindus also. A lot of people in the Hindu community or the majority community who are saying that it is very difficult for them, because they are moderate, secular-minded people, that it is very difficult for us to digest the BJP and its ideology because it is too strident, too aggressive, too rightist. So they are trying to tell them, it is addressing these fence-sitters among the majority community, that look, you can come to the BJP, we are not like that, which you are thinking about us. We are very open, we are very rational, we are very accommodative, we are very inclusive. So all the doubts which are in the minds of person X who belongs to the majority community about the BJP, we are trying to neutralize that. And we are trying to make it more acceptable for you at the national level. At the regional level, of course, you understand in different states, different political equations work regionally. So the political party A would be against, something in this state and not against the same thing in the other state, because there is a certain political dynamics there. And of course, BJP will never, ever at the state or the national level talk for Muslim reservation, because that is a bit too much. Because I'm a Hindu majoritarian political party, how can I talk about reservation being given to Muslims? Because we are ideologically against any religion-based reservation. And that is the reason we exclude Muslims from any kind of reservation category, because in a secular country, technically, so here we become secular, in a technically secular country, there can be no reservation in the name of religion, of course not. So that is there. But of course, there can be certain modulations in the policy depending upon the state where you are operating in. So that is there. But otherwise, I think it is basically addressed to the, not necessarily, but also to the moderate sections in the majority community, to make them see BJP as a more moderate, more inclusive, and more acceptable party where you also have a place. So you can get in the bus. So you need not be standing outside.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Any other questions? Somebody has any other query or comment?
Are you connected? Are you out of?
Okay, so sorry.
Yeah.
I think there's some issues are here. Okay, so Professor, while others actually kind of think of their questions, I want to ask, what is the way forward, from a situation like this? Now, you also mentioned that, other political party, new political party from the Muslims, because there's a large chunk of Muslim population in, in Uttar Pradesh, and then in Bengal, and then Bihar. So, but then you also ruled out, it's not going to be helpful. I see that point. I think this is also like valid. Now, so given in the situation, like now mainstream political parties are not kind of taking them or giving the due representation, and now they will not have any representation for themselves also by having their own political parties, or they cannot win on their own. And given this situation, like what is the way forward, for Muslims, for political representation wise? Any thoughts on that?
As far as political representation, technically, that political representation is concerned, the situation is not very favorable at the moment. Because as we discussed about the first past the post system, in this kind of a system, any group which is a minority group does not have much chance. And that too, when the major political parties' electoral strategy is based on a kind of anti-minority stance. So you have very little space to move out, because upon your marginalization depends the prosperity of the other political party. And it is not the other political party, but the political party which is in power at the center and most of the states. So their politics depends on, marginalizing you, or putting you on the periphery. So in that situation, you have very little space. But the point is, what I was trying to say, that at least in this dire situation, Muslims or any minority group should not fall prey to such kind of emotive appeals coming from such people who claim to be their political leaders, but end up vitiating the atmosphere, creating more communal discord, and eventually going to help the party against which, or which is their tormentor. I'll give you an example to illustrate. There is a very prominent political leader in your own city of Hyderabad, Mr. Owaisi, whose political party is there in your, in that area of Telangana and elsewhere. But he has no ground support in UP, for example. Now, when elections in UP are held, Owaisi Saab will immediately come and contest elections in different seats. He also, in his wisdom, would understand that his political party would have almost no chance of winning any election. But what he would do definitely is to create some kind of counter-communal mobilization, which eventually will work to the advantage of the BJP. So what somebody who has some kind of a presence in Telangana will not fight or contest all seats in Telangana, but will come and contest more seats in UP where you have no ground support. You can understand, this reciprocal relationship between the BJP and their political party. How they, don't say that it is advertent, but maybe inadvertently you are going to support that very political party against which you are coming and putting up candidates. So people have to be cautious, enough, because the same thing happened in Bihar elections last time and in UP also. In all elections in UP, he has to put up candidates, but those candidates do not win elections. But they create some kind of vote split, ensuring the defeat of some candidates, and then eventually creating the overall. Statistically, the effect is less, but at the level of atmospherics, you create that kind of a communal polarization, which works to the advantage of the BJP. So that is what is something, which people need to understand. Of course, people of all communities need to understand what are these emotive appeals and how do they work, but more so the minority community, because they have to understand, how to survive in these situations, because it is all being done at their cost. So they have to be more conscious, more sensible, more realistic. And of course, if somebody comes and talks about their real issues or issues of existence, of jobs or other things, whatever issues concern them materially, I think that is where people in general need to respond positively. Otherwise, it's wiser for them to be rather more sensible and more rather holding back their emotions and putting their rational faculties to work more. That's what one could say at most.
Thank you. Actually, in certain Hyderabad circles, and people already started talking about this, this guy's in the politics in the UP, because, as I said, he doesn't have a locus standi, OIC, but, he still kind of, goes to this, Bihar or Uttar Pradesh, whenever there are elections, and they say that, this is actually kind of, he knows that, he's working in favor of BJP rather than kind of, working in favor of local Muslims at all. But yet, knowing that it's not working for Muslims, why is he actually kind of going there and contesting elections? It is
that is a big question. Only he can answer that question. We can just speculate.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Professor Beg, this is a wonderful talk. We really enjoyed. It's a kind of insightful talk, and then several questions also followed up. Discussions and all that. Thank you so much for taking us to kind of the political scenario and then Muslim situations. Both at social level and then also in the political, and then also, I think in the coming days, in the coming years, we'll kind of keep on thinking on how to kind of overcome this, and then maybe kind of make definitely how to kind of make Muslim community a part of this larger, part and parcel of, because it seems like they are like so-called untouchables, they're part apart, to put in Ambedkar words. Actually now they're not kind of a part of the nation, they're a part of this nation, seems. So, but the whole point is kind of to make them kind of part of the larger whole. How do we do that? And I think that there's something that we need to collectively think forward and then work on those lines now. Thank you so much. I'll get in touch with you. Wonderful.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to all of you and to interact. Thank you, sir.